up, guys? Welcome back to the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. Got a few things to talk about today about the past week of pro wrestling and sports entertainment news. A lot of big stuff happened last week in all three of the major worldwide companies. But before we get into that, I would like to remind you guys that I have a lot of free goodies down in the description box below. And I do want to turn you on to a friend of mine, Courtney Bell. She does a yoga online platform and she has a Patreon, and her Patreon is rather interesting these days. So if you want to check it out, look at the links down in the description box below. If you want to get in shape, or if you just enjoy watching fun yoga videos, I definitely suggest it. But let's talk about what happened this past week in the world of pro wrestling and sports entertainment. First and foremost, the crazy week that WWE had, where I will say at this point in time, I would consider they may have pulled off the best work in at least the last 15 years in pro wrestling. So of course, as we all did last week, everybody was flipping out after last week when The Rock was going to take over. I said that, you know, this might turn into be like a not a Rock Hogan, but a Hogan Sting event, like from Starrcade 97, where you start seeing the first big major mistake that, you know, a company made when they were on a hot streak. That is part of the work, however, from what I'm assuming. And first off, before we get into this, I don't think anybody really knows how much of this was a shoot and how much of this was a work. Did they start off saying that, well, we're going to put Rock and Roman in the main event because it's the one everybody wants to see, and you know, we'll do Cody's things later, and then we'll gauge how the fans react to it, and we'll switch up as time goes along? Or was this a big masterful plan all along? I have come to learn, listening to so many documentaries and so many interviews with people in the wrestling business over the years, that very rarely are these master plans actually planned out ahead of time. So I'm going to lean towards more of it somewhere in the middle. But regardless of whether or not it was a work or a shoot, they're definitely working it now. The press conference that happened Thursday, even though it was way longer than it should have been, and we got a lot of filler stuff. Bianca Belair was there and didn't announce any kind of match. Bayley, famously, a lot of people mentioned the fact that Bayley, who won the Women's Rumble, was not there at all. We had Rhea Ripley and Io and all the other showdowns, but the main thing was seeing The Rock and Cody and Roman. Oh yeah, Seth Rollins was there too. So to recap, I'm sure everybody's seen it now and you've heard about it now. The Rock actually didn't do the Hogan Sting thing. He did the Hogan NWO thing when he joined with Roman as part of the Bloodline. And you know, but more about their family, and they showed the family tree, and I thought that part was pretty cool. I think the Rock talking about his family and his lineage and appreciating Roman was kind of cool, and you know, from a realistic standpoint. But as far as the story is concerned, it's The Rock becoming a heel. Seth is out there. He tried to have his part in this, but Cody was the main thing, because Cody is the one who had the right to choose who he was going to face at WrestleMania. The right was his, and he chose Roman. So after all that hullabaloo for the whole week, we are getting Roman and Cody at WrestleMania as the main event. Now, where The Rock is going to fit into this, where Seth Rollins is going to fit into this, because Seth did jump in there, because Roman took a shot at Dusty, which is Cody's dad, his late father. Cody took a shot back at Roman and his family. The Rock seemingly, you know, not going, well, you know, all's fair because you know, Roman, you did call out his dad. Nah, Rock is just upset about his family being called out. You know what this reminded me of? This reminded me of looking at social media in the wrestling space and somebody saying something bad about one company and another person saying something bad back about them, and then somebody defending the first company, completely ignoring the fact that, you know, their guy said something crappy about that. It reminds me of a lot of wrestling Twitter disputes online, which are really silly in itself. So that's what this kind of felt like. CM Punk has some interesting commentary. He's still kind of bitter about the AEW thing. He was talking about, oh, the boss puts your hands on you, I'm throwing hands, I'm punching people. So he's still, you know, trying to work over his, punching people in backstage is what you're supposed to do in wrestling in a good working environment. He was making comments. I did note that they had The Rock in the background who was listening to the stuff that CM Punk was saying, so maybe that's something in the future. There's a lot of legs that they can get out of this press conference on a lot of different storylines, not only for WrestleMania, but well beyond WrestleMania. And again, hats off, I should say, to Triple H and everybody else who's working creative right now in WWE. Number one, they are planning for the future still. They're still planting seeds for things that we're going to not see for another 6 months to a year. So good on them to keep this hot streak going. And also working off of the fact that we, as wrestling fans, whether you like WWE or not, they worked off the fact that we have been so conditioned to WWE shortchanging up-and-coming stars, whether it was Dolph Ziggler in 2014, Bryan Danielson, CM Punk, so on and so forth. We've seen it so many times that the fans were kind of conditioned to think, oh, here they go again. They're going to do this thing again that we don't like. When we want somebody to come up and then they cut them off at the knees, they use that bad history of their own booking to work the wrestling crowd. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good. It's also a good sign that maybe, yes, the company has turned the corner and they're not going to be the drizzling craps, that this last 2.5 years, however long you want to call it, of good WWE, good sports entertainment is going to continue well into the next year or maybe the next couple of years before they have a slowdown anytime soon. They're rocketing. They're a white hot on fire right now. It was a good thing. I did find it interesting too that the language, this felt like a UFC event. We had the Triple H backstage, The Rock and Roman walking past him and saying a lot of stuff back and forth to each other, which was kind of good. So there's a power play going on with The Rock and Paul Levesque. I noticed that he is going by Paul Triple H Levesque now. And, that one picture of all of them on stage, there was so much history there with The Rock and Roman, but also The Rock and Triple H's history. You also had Nick Aldis there and Cody won the championship his father had from Nick Aldis, who, for those of you who aren't familiar with Nick Aldis, he was kind of the Roman Reigns of Billy Corgan's NWA for a while, so as the world champion. So there's a lot packed into there. Of course, again, you got Punk and his input into all of this, so there's a lot they can do in the future. I want to see how it turns out, and yeah, kudos to WWE for pulling off a really, really well done press conference and a really, really good, really, really well done swerve. Whether it was intended or not, again, we don't know. And what is the plan all along? We'll never know, I think. And I kind of like that. I think the wrestling companies should be ahead of the fans and ahead of the dirt sheets and throwing curveballs out there for us so we can enjoy that and stop talking about the backstage stuff so much because we're wrapped up in what's happening in the storylines. Speaking of which, and I will have a video about this sometime in the future, I'm hoping, but we switch over to All Elite Wrestling. They've been kind of treading water the last couple of weeks, although this past week's Dynamite was a stellar Dynamite. Unfortunately, the ratings weren't so good for it. I'm really kind of perplexed as to what's going on with AEW because they are putting on some good shows, but then they put on shows that are a little bit boring. And this week was kind of an example of that. The Dynamite show was really, really good. That Swerve Strickland match with Hangman Page, that trilogy is fantastic. The way they did the double turn at the end of it with Hangman turning heel officially and Swerve seemingly officially turning face, that was pretty cool. Some of the other stuff in there with the Bucks coming in and their EVP trigger and bloodying up Darby Allin and Sting and Sting's sons, as Sting and Darby won the tag titles from Big Bill and Ricky Starks this past week. That was really good. A lot of stuff they set up on the show was really good. Collision, I did watch Collision this week, and kind of a lukewarm Collision for me. So Collision has a problem though of being filled with now what was considered a show filled with CM Punk and CM Punk's boys. Now seems like a show that's filled with a bunch of people who are waiting out their contracts to expire so they can go back to WWE. It's not a good look. They got to change that up somewhat. But and I'm critical of AEW in some parts, and I'm celebratory of AEW. But AEW's success and measuring their success against WWE is always a fool's errand, and I think it's a silly, stupid thing that needs to stop happening. You need to measure AEW success as far as AEW is concerned, and whether or not they're doing well for being a number 2 wrestling brand in a country that hasn't had a number 2 wrestling brand for 20 some odd years. So, you know, they're still going to have issues. I do have issues with their storytelling. As an author myself, I do have some issues with that, and I think that will be a video I'm going to breach, our topic that I'm going to breach sometime this week, hopefully, if I have time to do it. But overall, I think it was a fun week for AEW. Of course, the biggest thing is the big business announcement. They already kind of gave up the ghost on it. If you looked at the graphic, and people picked this out immediately the first day on Dynamite when it happened. The big business show from Boston, we're getting Mercedes Mone. You saw the boss thing on the graphics. We already covered it. Mercedes Mone is going to be there. But knowing AEW in these debuts, I do not think, and I think a lot of people are expecting more than just Mercedes Mone to be at that show. Will Ospreay did just wrap up in New Japan. Kazuchika Okada is wrapping up in New Japan, and there are some other names floating out there in the wrestling world, so we'll see what happens with that in the future. And there's still, you know, the rumors going around with WWE announcing recently its Netflix deal. There's still been a lot of conjecture as to whether or not AEW is going to wind up with HBO Max. So that also is something to wonder about as far as this big business tag is concerned, and whether or not they're getting renewed at TBS, which we all assume that they're going to be renewed by Warner Discovery for TBS and TNT for another couple of years. It's just how much is that contract going to be, and we're going to see what happens in the future with that. So this past week wasn't so much big news for AEW. Really solid Dynamite, kind of a lukewarm Collision, but heading into the TD Carton show, the Boston show, that's where everything's going to be aiming to now. And of course, we've got Revolution coming up at the beginning of March, which of course leads us into some other things that happened in the wrestling world, where the most emotional thing that happened this past week was New Japan Pro Wrestling. And we are really there now. The end of this past era, the end of that great era, has kind of officially happened now. New Japan had their New Beginning show, or one of their final New Beginning big shows on their tour. Okada took on Hiroshi Tanahashi for the last time. Okada's last singles match in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Bittersweet. He wins the series overall with Tanahashi by winning this match, which was kind of interesting. And Okada has been in tears for the last 2 weeks. Tama Tonga's been in tears the last 2 weeks, and Will Ospreay's been in tears. The fans have been in tears. I've been close to tears at one time or another, seeing these guys kind of leaving here. You know, it's been very, very emotional watching New Japan, especially if you've been watching for at least the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years or more, just to see, you know, that era officially dying now, and we are in a new era. But you know, hats off to the classy way in which New Japan has done this, which I was not so sure about the way they were booking the departures of all of these stars. But now having watched it, you know, the love that people have, it speaks to the quality of New Japan. And despite the fact, and yeah, I know there are people who rag on New Japan. There are people who don't know anything about New Japan and don't care about it, blah, 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 whatever. But here's the thing about it. I have never seen such a, from the actual performers, these guys, Ospreay, Okada, Tama Tonga, they all have such emotional ties to this company that these grown men are breaking down into tears almost every single show, because this is a part of their life that they gave themselves to this company, and the fans gave back to them. The company may not have given back to them as much as they should have, but the fan base is what they're going to miss. The Japanese fans who supported these guys, who helped these guys become stars, who helped these guys make a living. And yeah, they're all going off now to make more money elsewhere. But I think I've never seen, you know, people leaving a wrestling company and being this broken up about, you know, usually when wrestlers leave wrestling companies, they're usually happy to get out of there, or, you know, there may be a little sad thing here and there, but I've never seen guys, it felt like these guys were retiring. You see this when guys retire from wrestling, not when they leave a company often. So this was really, really crazy to watch. all of this. But this last show this past weekend was an amazing show. I've been looking forward to it for a while. The big notable things outside of Okada and Tanahashi's last match, we did have, I love you guys, but TMDK, I never want you guys back on color commentary again. So TMDK came on color commentary. Fortunately, it was for some of the preliminary multi-man tag matches, and they were so, they thought they were funny. They were not funny. Even to the point Chris Charlton had to tell them, just look, stop, because they were just being weird. It wasn't like a funny haha. It was to the point where I was kind of wondering, I was like, you guys think things are funny that are just kind of creepy. It's like, stop drooling so much over all of these young guys. This is not, I'm getting it's feeling a little weird. So, there was that element to it. Fortunately, again, they were off the commentary booth before Okada and Tanahashi started, which is when the real card basically started on that night. That show also had the rematch between Bryan Danielson and Zack Sabre Jr. I will say that match was better than the WrestleDream match. I love that match. This is probably one of the match. It's definitely a match of the year contender. And if you haven't seen it, definitely go out of your way to see Danielson versus ZSJ at the New Beginning show in New Japan. Zack wins this one, so they're 1-1 with each other. But again, neither one of them has made the other one tap, which makes me think that possibly All In and Wembley, that we're going to get a third match between Danielson and Zack Sabre Jr., but they're going to kind of part ways for now. Zack held out his hand to shake Danielson's hand. It's a sign of good sportsmanship after the match. Danielson looked at first like he wasn't going to do it, but he did shake Zack's hand and did raise his hand. But I do not think that this is over between the two of them, but it's going to take a breather for a while. Danielson's got things to do back in AEW. Zack's now got to find a new direction. He's been asking for the ball. He is one of the few remaining guys from the last big era in New Japan Pro Wrestling. He's still there. He hasn't left. So, what New Japan's going to do with him, time will tell in the future. But I do think I do see big things. This might be one of the biggest years for Zack Sabre Jr. And New Japan, if you wind up doing that, please pay this guy to keep him around, at least for another couple years. I like, cause the thing with Zack though is that I don't think Zack's style will work in the States. American wrestling fans, and you can just see it, and if you look at the WrestleDream match and you watch this one from New Beginning, you can just tell from listening to the crowd, the difference between the crowds. The Japanese fans, they definitely have a much higher appreciation for what Zack and Danielson did than the American fans did. Not like the American fans didn't have appreciation for it, but it's a different tone. I think that works a lot better in Eastern wrestling than it does in Western wrestling. And then we got to get to the big stuff. There was a lot of big stuff on this show. I definitely suggest you watching that New Beginning show. It was absolutely fantastic. But the big main event of that whole night was the War Dogs in the steel cage against the United Empire. Now, this steel cage surprised me because New Japan doesn't do a lot of cage matches, and the cage was weird. It was a very short steel cage. It probably was maybe 8 feet tall. And it was the bar style of cage. It was more kind of just like it's more like they put up an extra high security barrier around the ring. Like they usually have the security barriers around the ring for the fans. It's just like they had an extra high one for this match. It really didn't feel so much like a cage until the guys started getting in there and started working with it. Francesca Akira had a crazy dive off the top of it, which scared me. I was watching this thing afraid it was going to fall over at some point in time. I was really scared about that happening. I was just like, guys, please don't try to do a bunch of crazy stuff, especially you, Ospreay. But they were contained in this match. It was a good way to highlight both the United Empire and the Bullet Club War Dogs. I will say that coming out of this, the United Empire still looks like less of a cohesive. They're still kind of slightly bickering with each other even after the match. There's a lot more going on with the United Empire. We still don't know who's the new leader in Japan going to be. TJP wants to be it. Jeff Cobb looked more like the heir apparent leader during and after this match, so we'll see what happens there. But the War Dogs did win this one. Again, it was structured more like a War Games match. Finley and Ospreay started the match. Supposed to be 2 minutes. They made it 5 minutes to really make it like War Games. Then you got one of the War Dogs in for the advantage. Then one of the United Empire. You guys know how this works with the War Games matches in the past. Or Blood and Guts if you're an AEW fan. By the time everybody got in this ring, to be noted, Gabe Kidd was the last one in for the War Dogs. This was just brutal. It was an hour of just vicious, violent wrestling. They even took the New Japan logo off the mat because basically they weren't sanctioning this match. So this was just all out crazy. The crowd actually enjoyed it. The crowd, it's funny when Japanese crowds see a match that's very much styled like a Western wrestling match, they will let you know because they'll start chanting Western wrestling fan stuff. They started chanting, "This is awesome," and "Fight Forever" and stuff like that. They chanted that. They did it during the Danielson Zack Sabre Jr. match too. It's really funny that they switched to a Western, some of the fans switched to a Western crowd when you're giving them Western wrestling. Now, and I would agree, I think that doesn't say too much it says maybe that Gato is a little bit too heavy on his Western booking with New Japan, and the fans kind of know it, but that's a whole other story for another time. But overall, this was a great show. Ospreay again in tears after the match. I guess she's not his wife, but his girlfriend, his partner was there. She was probably not happy that he covered her outfit in all his blood, but it was emotional. It was emotional like many of these matches on this night. I think this was a great show. I definitely recommend you watching the whole show. You can't skip over when TMDK is doing commentary though, but the rest of the show, it was just fantastic. And the War Dogs, I told you guys, I think they're on for bigger and better things. They are great. I should say the core four are great. And we all know that Gabe Kidd's going to be running that faction come maybe a year or two from now. David Finlay is not long for the Bullet Club War Dogs. But they've got to establish it first before they do the turn. A lot of people have been saying they want Gabe Kidd to lead Bullet Club. I think you're going to hear a lot more of that over the next year or two as David Finlay continues to lead his Rebel Club, his War Dogs in New Japan. And I think there's some big things. And, of course, he's got the Nick Nemeth, a.k.a. Dolph Ziggler match coming up pretty soon. So that's something to watch out for this coming weeks in New Japan. Another thing, too, is that the Guerrillas of Destiny, El Phantasmo and Hikuleo lost the IWGP Tag Team Championships to Kenta and Chase Owens, which I was shocked at. So they're no longer double champions, and they wanted to have their last match against the original Guerrillas of Destiny, Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa. Tama Tonga's got one more, I think he's got one or two more matches left on his New Japan schedule before he heads off to wherever he's going, probably WWE. We don't know yet. But they lost the tag titles. So Chase Owens, once again, is a tag team champion. Kenta is a tag champion with him. And I don't know. The tag team division just got really weird in New Japan. It looked like they were trying to build it up again, but this was kind of a curveball. Kenta and Chase Owens? I don't know. As with these things, sometimes I'm going to give it a couple weeks and see if it makes sense as they, what do they have in mind? Do they have anything in mind? We'll give it a chance and see what happens with it. It does also make me kind of worry about El Phantasmo's contract because I haven't heard anything about it. If I was him, I would stay at least another year in New Japan because I think with a lot of the other guys gone, New Japan is probably going to hand him a lot of good stuff. So I think him and Zach are going to be leaned on as far as Gaijin in-house talent for New Japan over the next year at least. So, hopefully Phantasmo stays around. He's very entertaining. He's very underrated in the wrestling world. And I hope that this next year, now that there needs to be people stepping up in those spots, that ELP can step up in those spots and he can shine the way we know he's shining. He's not a spring chicken either, so it's kind of now or never for him one way or another. But this was a great week. Like I said, the last week in wrestling was a lot of fun. I enjoyed WWE. I enjoyed AEW. I enjoyed New Japan. And you guys, this is the way I think you should. This is what I think most people should do with wrestling. It's like there's a bunch of different wrestling shows. Some of them are good. They're all kind of different in their own way, and they're all enjoyable in their own way. And we need to stop comparing them to each other because you can't enjoy it that way. But anyway, I want to know what you guys thought of these shows. Did you watch the WWE press conference? What do you think about the massive work shoot angle that they have just run and played on everybody? What do you think about AEW Dynamite and the AEW Collision shows, the announcement of Big Business, and obviously, Mercedes Mone coming to AEW, and who else do you think might be showing up at that Big Business show, and what other news might be dropped on us at that Big Business show? And what do you feel about the emotional departures of New Japan Pro Wrestling over the last couple of weeks? I've never seen so many grown men cry and legitimately cry and cry in a way that doesn't make me laugh at them as I have. This is a very emotional time right now in New Japan Pro Wrestling. But let me know what you guys think about that. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Until next time, if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe button, and the notification bell. And be sure to share this video on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, TikTok. I don't even know how you can do that on TikTok, but anywhere you talk about wrestling on social media. Until then, I'll see you guys here for more news, rumors, and commentary on the Rant and Review Pro Wrestling. Have a good day.